don't you stop. Keep going. And seeing the 5 cars driving up here with one purpose for one person really got to me, I gotta say. Mom, we miss you. Florence Janowitz Spann, here's some ideas of who the group. Florence Janowitz Spann was, as we know, a very talented and beautiful person. She also had a great sense of humor and made outstanding stuffed cabbage. She was not one to toot her own horn, but her artistic talents were definitely up there. Her uncanny ability to play beautiful renditions of songs on the piano in any key, and probably never having had any formal piano lessons, was most likely the seed of whatever musical ability has been passed down in our family. I remember how amazing her oil paintings were when she finally took some painting lessons in Sarasota. And we've all seen her truly wonderful pencil sketches she did while she was at various assisted living facilities. One of her lesser-known talents was that of writing cute little poems for family occasions. So what I want to share with you now, that Mo and Ben have 5 copies, so they're going to give you a picture to look at of Grandma Flo, and somehow share with your neighbors, because we have 5. Just help him figure out who to give them to. And tell me when everybody has something to look at. Because if you look at her face, you will see her cracking up. And what I want to share with you today, that this was from a surprise bridal shower for me and Ron in Sarasota at the home of Anita Brooker in April of 1991, which was 27 years ago. And I am so glad someone thought to take a picture of Mom while she was reading the poem she wrote for us. As you can see, she is cracking up while she's reading it, and as are those people around the table. And some of the faces you might recognize on the far left are Wendy Nalvin and Gretchen Seri, and then Pat Stenberg, and then going around, these are all our music friends. Going around the table was Doris Wolf, if you see Doris in the little corner there, Ann Swain, Bonnie Kaplan, and Katie Swain. I would like to read to you the poem that Mom wrote, which is on the other side of the picture, if you want to follow along. So this is the poem Mom wrote for Maddie and Ron at their surprise bridal shower. Maddie, as a child, was a tomboy. Riding horses and climbing trees were really her joy. She wasn't very concerned with what was in fashion. Acrobatics and sports were her real passion. She lost her 2 front teeth in a bicycle ride. She wasn't at fault, but she took it in her stride. The diving team and girls' football team were her choices at Sarasota High. She cut her hair so short, from the back she looked like a god. Cuts and bruises she could pick up with the best. At times she almost gave me cardiac arrest. But that's all in her past, and now music is her love, and that's how Ron came into her life, probably with help from above. And Ron was there as well. As for Ron, his razor-sharp wit is one of a kind. When talking to him, be alert or you'll have to go back to rewind. Ron's personality matches hers for sheer effervescence. When they are together, there is an air of incandescence. They're really so good for each other, and I know for sure that this marriage will long endure. I could bore you all and go on and on. I'll just end by saying, have a great life, and I love you, Maddie and Ron. And we love you, Mom. Thanks, Dad. Billy boy, Billy boy.
Charming Billy. She did. Let me tell you, last week I was being there. Oh, that's funny. I don't know the words in between that, but I know the chorus. The chorus. Yeah. She cannot leave her mother.
Her evokes a time and a place. The house on Lewin Drive, golf carts, a white floppy sun hat, a red Maybelline eyebrow pencil, and cat-eye sunglasses. When I was little, I thought she was a famous movie star who'd retired to Florida, as they do, with glamorous black and white photos of her past triumphs adorning her walls. I never knew much about her childhood because she was always focused on her family and the people around her, looking forward, finding ways to help and to be supportive, and she always was. When my mom went back to school and back to work full-time, Grandma Flo stepped up for us. She drove all of us grandkids to Hebrew school. She carpooled with all of our friends. She came to all of our various soccer games and performances. Family was always very important to her. She hosted so many family gatherings at the villa, always worrying about her cooking and urging us to eat, but don't force yourself. I believed as a kid that I was wonderful and talented because she always told me so. She would play songs on the piano, and I would belt my little heart out, convinced that the world was my oyster because she believed in me. Before I make her sound like a timid old lady, let us not forget that she also had a feisty side. This girl was from the Bronx, and she didn't mess around when action was needed. From defending Charlie from a neighborhood bully, it's a great story, to holding her own with a, let's say, opinionated husband. She was no pushover. Florence Spen was kind, gentle, funny, and had killer cheekbones. We're all better people for having had her in our lives, and we will miss her.
Flows, and my father, Phil, was a cousin, a brother of Harry, who we call Gershon. I just want to say a few words about when the family came here, and then say a prayer after that. They all came from Poland, not necessarily at the same time. My grandfather came first to try to find a job, and it was the only job he could find was as a candler, meaning holding a candle up to a flame to see if it was fertile or not. And that was a trade that a lot of immigrants did when they first came over. None of them spoke any English when they arrived. One of the things my father remembered very well is the time they went with their father, my grandfather, to one of the fruit stands on the Lower East Side near where they lived, and they had never seen fruit like this from back in Poland, and they saw a banana. And my grandfather, the guy working the fruit stand, was Jewish, so in Yiddish, my grandfather would hold it up and say, "What is this?" The guy said, "It's a banana." Well, how do you eat it? Do you eat it from the middle, or how do you get in there? Is it okay to eat the skin? So then he would hand it back to, and the guy would demonstrate peeling a banana. Then they saw a pineapple. Put these on the top of it like this. My dad said, I thought it was from Mars or something like this. So all four of the boys just were amazed by the stuff they saw for the first time when they came to this country. A quick mention, a fast forward a number of years, Sarah and Gershon moved to Brighton Beach, which is the next neighborhood from where I grew up in Brooklyn. And we used to visit them there, pretty frequently. And Gershon was fond of telling this joke. about the time he went to go to work out the back door of the house they lived in prior to that, or the apartment, and then remembering he forgot to kiss Sarah goodbye, and he would sneak in to the kitchen. She would be at the sink doing the dishes, the breakfast dishes, and when he came close to her, she said, according to him, 2 milk, 1 cream. That's when people delivered milk and cream.
Milkman.
None of that ever happened. I'm pretty sure. But he loved to tease her about it, only because she would never do it, apparently. Well, I'd like to say a prayer, the Kaddish prayer. It's traditional in Judaism to say this in recognition of the deceased person. And one of the things that's interesting is the prayer does not mention death. Okay, so we're doing it for our memories of the person, but it doesn't mention death. And to me, that's an indication that we don't have to dwell on her death. We can dwell on her life, as we've been doing in the comments that you all have made. So I'll say this in Hebrew. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei rabba v'yaholma divrochi rusei v'yamlich machusei v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei decho beis Yisrael ba'gala uv'izman korib v'yimaru. Amen. Eshme Rabba Mavorach Liolam Alal Meil Maya Yisparach V'yishtabach V'yispar V'yisramam V'yisnasei V'yishador V'yishaleh V'yishalal Shemei Dekudesha Parichu Liehela Min Kol V'chosa V'shirosa Tushbecha sabnechem asa damiran bi'alma v'yimeru. Amen. Yesh lama rabba min shamaya v'yachim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen.
Yes.
My little Tot focuses more on her last years when I was with her in Baltimore. The thing about my mom, our Grandma Flo, was she had no idea how special and talented she was, which I think made her even more special. No one, including herself, could believe she was 95 years old. I was so fortunate that we were about 10 minutes from each other. I need a tissue. I could pop over any time, and she was always happy to see me after her initial look of surprise and disbelief, and say, Heidi? So I'm on like almost to the end. Usually I felt I was coming to see my mom, but usually it felt as if I were coming to see a good friend. She was so honest. I just loved it when the first thing out of her mouth would be, I don't like how your hair looks.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like you didn't comb it. But most of the time, she would enjoy just hearing about life in Pikesville. And then she'd go, where are I? Pikesville? How did I end up in Pikesville? And then once when Aunt Eleanor came to visit, the two of them were absolutely going to hysterics, talking about Pikesville? Of all places, how did I get to Pikesville? They were crying by the end of it.
She and Mom would reminisce together about funny times with their sister Norma and some memories of their parents. Eleanor would always bring up things from the past she knew that would make Mom laugh. Mom had almost no physical infirmities that usually come with old age. You know how most of us have at least a little arthritis somewhere? Well, she didn't know from such things. Actually, as far as I know, she did not experience any pain anywhere. In this respect, I don't think she realized how fortunate she was. But the thing she hated most was having to take those horrible tasting medicines and pills, which on occasion she actually refused to take. And according to her, why were they given to her in the first place? She didn't need them. She'd say, "No, I don't have high blood pressure." I'd try to explain to her that the reason she didn't have high blood pressure was because of the medicine. But she refused to accept that. She exclaimed she just didn't need those meds, and she could be very adamant at times. She was beyond agile. My son Elon lives in a townhouse downtown Baltimore. There are lots of steps to get in. Once we brought my mom there, and in order to get her up the narrow staircase, Paul, my husband, and Elon carried her up in the wheelchair, having to tilt her to one side. As you may have guessed, she did not like that. So when it was time for us to leave, Mom let us know she wasn't going to go down the same way she came up. After sitting on the top stair, she scooted her little tushy down, one step at a time, and it was just fine. She never wanted to go back there again. How she was able to hear a tune just a couple of times and sit down at the piano, experiment a little till she found the right key, and then knock it out, but with her special Flo touch, was so amazing. The songs that I knew that she loved the most and she'd play over and over when she came to my house were those from Fiddler on the Roof, The King and I, Man from La Mancha, Cats, Phantom of the Opera. But first I must backtrack for a second. My mom would agree to come over when I would ask her, most of the time, so I would pick her up and we'd make the short trip to my house. I'd pull up in the driveway, get out, go to open my mom's side of the car, only to hear her say, "I think I'll just stay in the car. It's fine here." But other times, she would be in a hurry to get out, saying, "I have a certain tune in my head. Take me straight to the piano."
Really?
And that song, I think the song that she once was trying to think of was in the Windmills of My Mind. Is that goes da 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 da?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
yeah. One so funny but kind of sad incident was when my grandson, 4-year-old Brody, who lives in Brooklyn, and his parents were over visiting, and they tend not to put on any classical music or pretty music or musicals, even though every time I see them I beg them to. So when Brody was visiting in the backyard, he loves to dance, and he was just doing every single kind of mood he could think of, and he was looking directly into Mommy's eyes like, look at me, and you know, he was all over the place. And he was singing, or I don't know, the kids were singing some hip-hop melody that he loves. So then we got the idea that maybe Mommy could play a song, because I wanted him to see Mommy play the piano. But there wasn't any song that he knew, that she knew. There was no common song. And it just made me so sad. But being the good sport that she always was, she tried so hard to play some of the tunes that Brody sang to her, like some of the tunes from Frozen. But it just didn't work. Of course, she wasn't always happy and cheerful. She'd get down in the dumps at times, but usually all it took to snap her out of it would be to start playing Scrabble. Things would happen that put us in stitches. We'd make a word, thinking we were so clever, only to see the other person had made it earlier in the game. When choosing letters, we'd inexplicably ended up with 5 of the same letters in our hand. Or trying to pretend a word was a real word, even if it wasn't in the dictionary. Or one time, when Mom decided it was okay to make a word vertically with the first letter at the bottom of the word.
Making up her own rules.
Whenever I came, she'd ask about my family, what they were up to, and then we'd go on to talking about everyone in the family. She would get confused about where they lived, but almost always remembered everyone's names and the name of their spouses. When talking to Maddie, she'd always ask about how Ron was doing.
Always.
Yep. And she was so happy when she heard Sam had gotten married to Erin. No matter where she went, the caretakers would let me know how much they loved taking care of her and what a nice lady she was. I'm sure this had to do with her not wanting to bother the staff unnecessarily. But also I'm sure it was her sense of humor. She was as witty, and she just loved to kibitz, leaving everyone with a smile on his or her face. I'm sure as a child she was the teacher's pet. Despite her kidding around in physical therapy, she took it very seriously and stuck with it until at that session she'd almost be wiped out. I'd say more than anything, having to be in a wheelchair is what bothered her the most. She really wanted to be able to walk again, and I don't mean using a walker. The funniest thing was how many boxes of tissues she went through. Every time I'd leave her room, she'd remind me to buy her more tissues. Her pocket would be bulging with them, but she'd always want to take a few more just in case. Her nose really did drip, though.
I got that from her.
She had a special way of folding the tissues before she put them in her pocket, a way I could never do quite as well. Sometimes at the end of the day, I would take them out of her pocket before putting her clothes in the laundry, and I usually throw away the crumpled ones, but save some of the ones that were still perfectly folded, and she agreed to use them the following day. What I really appreciated so much about Grandma Flo was how gracious she was. I would feel very conflicted about going out of town and leaving her, but I do have children and grandchildren who live in New York. She would always tell me not to worry, that she'd be fine, which she really always was. But most days when I would leave to go home, the question she'd ask me was, "Will I see you tomorrow?" And if I said yes and didn't actually show up, she'd remember.
The daughter of Sarah Permit and Harry Janowitz, 2 immigrants from Eastern Europe. I believe one was from Poland and one was from Latvia, who somehow managed to meet, marry, and start a family. Mom was a New Year's Day baby, born January 1st, 1923, the middle child of 2 other sisters. Norma Keston was her eldest sister, and our aunt, Eleanor Ormond Prezioso, who was always the most fun-loving of the sisters, and she was the baby. Grandpa Harry was a carpenter by trade. He evidently was a good carpenter, too. He won the respect of my father, which was not easy to do. I think Grandpa Harry worked with his other son-in-law, Jack Keston, who is also quite a skilled craftsman. Grandpa Harry married Sarah Permit, evidently quite an attractive woman, who especially was known for her beautiful green eyes. While all their 3 kids had brown eyes, some of the following generations were born with beautiful light eye colors, Sam and Jesse, which I attribute to the Grandma Sarah gene.
Grandma Sarah was not a chef, as I recall. Most of her meals were swimming in a bland broth that was neither soup nor gravy. I probably came by my love of salt early, as a byproduct of eating Grandma Sarah's boiled chicken dinners. Mom, on the other hand, could actually cook pretty good, although it must have been demoralizing for her that when we wanted a real treat, we would beg her to make us Chef Boyardee spaghetti, which was right out of the box. Here's a story about my Grandma Sarah. On one of her many shopping trips, her purse was snatched by a thief. When the policeman asked her to describe her purse, she said in her thick Yiddish accent, "It was beige." Then the policeman asked her to describe the robber, and she said, "He was wearing a beige jacket." When asked how he got away, she said, "He was driving a car, it was beige." I'm pretty sure she never saw her purse again. So back to Mom. Florence Janowitz was a pretty little girl who grew into a beautiful woman. There weren't many cameras around in her day, so I really don't have many photos of her as a child. That all changed, by the way, when she married my father, Monroe Spin, a man who was a photographer, a man who never let any event, insignificant or not, go undocumented. It seems to me that Mom must have had a lot of pressure on her as a child to excel. She had a piano and learned to play by ear. She had a raw musical talent and love of music that stayed with her all her life. You could just hum a song to her and she could play it. And not just play it, but change the key so we could all sing it. Her musical talent stayed with her right up to the end. She sat down at Heidi's house one day when she was in her 90s and just picked up playing right where she left off. I have a video of her playing those songs. We were all transfixed listening to her. Her list of favorites included The Shadow of Your Smile, Sunrise, Sunset.
Oh, yeah.
So many beautiful songs. She probably could have been a real talent if nurtured. Instead, though, she brought hours of joy and music to our family. Mom was never happy living in Sarasota, or so she said.
So she moved to Baltimore.
Well, my father moved the family there in 1950 in a small house on Rose Street, a stone's throw away from Southside Elementary. And more importantly, the Southgate Shopping Center, of which the bowling alley was to become a focal point of my formative years. Mom didn't know how to drive when she moved to Sarasota, and she learned at my father's insistence. And it was sad when she was older and she had to give up her license. She was living at Brookdale Assisted Living in Sarasota, and she would take her little Honda Civic and drive it around the parking lot secretly until she hit another car. It wasn't a big deal, but she had to stop her driving excursions completely. She learned to live in Sarasota and learned to play golf, and she did so for many years. She got a lot of pleasure out of it, playing at Forest Lakes Golf Course and then having a nice lunch with her friends afterwards. Mom had the skinniest legs. She did. But in her golfing years, she had a tan right down to the top of her golf socks, and she was in great shape too. A really bad thing happened to Mom when she was about 45 years old. It was discovered that she had breast cancer. Back in those days, that was a dire diagnosis, and there was very little in the way of reconstruction of a woman's body after surgery. She had a radical mastectomy, removing not only the breast tissue, but the muscles on the underarm. Although I am very thankful that it saved her life, she was disfigured physically and emotionally, and I think it was about then she stopped playing golf. But she was a survivor, and she pulled her life together. Years later, I came to appreciate her even more. This is kind of infringing on Romy's. When I was a single working mom, she would pick up the kids from school and drive them home or to their lessons or religious school. Something that happened when we lived on South Shore Drive in Sarasota illustrated how protective she could be of her family. Charlie rode a bus home that dropped him at the end of our block, and he would walk up to our house.
Well, there was this kid named Glenn, a real boy, who used to scare Charlie and jump out of the bushes and beat him up. Mom heard about it and she decided on a plan. One day she hid in the bushes, waiting for Charlie to come walking down the street. When he came into view and she saw Glenn jump out at him, she pounced. She grabbed Glenn and yelled, "You leave my grandson alone." Having a grandmother scream at you must have humiliated Glenn to his core. That was the last time Charlie ever had to put up with Glenn's bullying. That gives you an idea of the grit that was behind Mom's soft-spoken exterior. Mom was always there to carpool Romy and her friends to religious school at Temple Emmanuel. And as a matter of fact, it was Mom who came up with the name Romy. My dad, Monroe, was ill for a long time before he died. He had congenital heart failure and was often hospitalized. While the two of them had a grudging kind of relationship, Mom was always there for him. Even after she moved out of the golf course house and into her own place on El Rado Drive, she used to bring food and pick up mail for him. I don't think he ever appreciated her. The two of them were just as different as two people could be. Dad was an adventurer. He loved to travel, especially to Israel. Mom would sometimes accompany him, but it was not her cup of tea. His obsession with Israel and Israelis was not shared, although she of course loved Israel too. Actually, on her mother's side of the family, they were some of the early settlers in Israel and still live in Netanya. After I moved out here to California, you thought I was almost done, didn't you? After I moved out here to California, Mom thought she would like to spend summers here to escape the Florida heat. So we bought her a townhouse in Mill Valley. She stayed in that townhouse for 3 summers and then decided she disliked the cold summers even more than the Sarasota. So she unhappily packed away her sweaters and moved back to Florida. She moved to Baltimore to be closer to Heidi about 2015. At this point, she couldn't live alone anymore because she had started falling and she needed more help. Heidi and the whole Goldberg family really took great care of Mom, and Mom enjoyed seeing her grandkids and her great-grandkids when they would visit her. Having Heidi take care of Mom added years to her life. It really did. It's true. We lost Mom April 11th. She had just about stopped eating and her speech was slurred due to a stroke. By the way, she always apologized for her slurred voice when I called her on the phone. But up until the last time I talked to her, she was alert and she had her wonderful sense of humor about herself. She used to poke fun at the other residents and was so entertaining. Before she died, I was at her bedside. She gave me an intense look, although she could not say anything. I know she knew I was there. She died shortly thereafter, and Heidi was there with her. So here are her ashes. It's probably the last place in the world you would have found Florence Janowitz during her lifetime. She neither was an outdoors person nor a hiker. But I told her that this was one of the most beautiful places that I had ever seen, with views of San Francisco, the Bay, and the Pacific beyond. This is where she said she wanted to be. And now when I look up at Mount Tam, which dominates the Marin coastline, I know that somewhere up here Mom is resting and looking out over all of us in her sometimes calm and sunny and sometimes foggy and windswept beauty. With love and tears, I wish you goodbye and heavenly rest. Oh God. Thanks.